Item 8A, ongoing affordability of senior housing at Neilson Villa, and we have 3 requests to speak.
And we have a
Good
staff
evening,
report from
Mayor
Mr. Kemper.
Good evening, Mayor, Council members. Jim Kemper from Housing and Economic Development. This item involves the preservation of low-income housing for 100 senior apartments at the property known as Neilson Villa, which is located on the southwestern edge of the city. The proposed action represents an approach which seeks to address specific concerns of the tenants and the property owner, as well as the city's general affordable housing goals. In preparing the staff recommendation, staff focused on several guiding principles, such as preserving long-term affordability, protecting seniors with an affordable rent, maintaining financial feasibility of the property, ensuring property maintenance, and facilitating necessary rehabilitation. The term sheet provided in Attachment A describes the parameters of the proposed contract amendment, which would provide a long-term extension of the affordability covenants while simultaneously bringing rent relief to the tenants and financial feasibility to the property. The key aspects of the term sheet include 55 years of affordability, during which 85% of the apartments would target extremely low income and low income seniors, $2.7 million set aside by the property owners for rehabilitation and an affordability fund, reasonable return on investment for the property owner, and the city option to purchase the property at the end of the agreement. Extending the current agreement and allowing the property owner to prepay the federal mortgage will enable the city to leverage 80 new rental housing vouchers from the federal government. The vouchers would be administered by the Santa Monica Housing Authority and require direct monitoring of the property and its operations by the Housing Authority. The vouchers would be issued to the tenants either as what are called enhanced vouchers, which will provide protection against future rent increases, but do not provide financial relief to the tenants regarding the current unaffordable rent that many of them are paying. Or the vouchers can be issued to the tenant, or the vouchers can be issued with the approval of the tenants as what are called project-based vouchers, under which the rules are different, and the aim of those type of vouchers are that the tenants will have to pay no more than 30% of their rent, of their income toward rent, which will bring rent relief to many of the seniors. And as a quick note on the demographics, I want to point out that 2 important things. One, the average age of the residents at this property are at 79, and then currently more than half of the non-subsidized tenants, the 80 non-subsidized tenants, are paying more than half of their income toward rent. Almost 2/3 are paying more than 40% of their income toward rent, and more than 4/5 are paying more than 30% of their income toward rent. The Santa Monica Housing Authority administration of vouchers means that each apartment would be inspected annually, and the future tenants would be selected from the city's waiting list, which incorporates the city's local preference policy. Regarding the necessary rehabilitation, staff commissioned a property condition report, which noted periodic rehabilitation has been ongoing and has already occurred, but estimated about $600,000 in needed rehabilitation needs to be undertaken over the next 12 years. The property owners have already committed and set aside $1 million, and therefore that should be sufficient to pay for the rehabilitation that is anticipated at this time. Finally, the staff report outlines 3 alternatives to the recommended proposal, including the pros and cons of each alternative. However, I need to point out that all of those options would not be available until 2018, when the city's option is triggered under the current contract with the property owners. In a nutshell, the 3 options are entitled city purchase of the property, where the city would pay $1 for the land but has to pay fair market value for the buildings. Another option, kind of a variation on the first one, city purchase and transfer to a nonprofit. Again, it still have to purchase it under the same scenario, but there would be additional challenges with costs in subsidizing nonprofit ownership. And then the third option would be where the property owner can purchase the city's land interest in the year 2018 at the highest and best use. But that is, that's the three. Under the first two alternatives, there is an unknown risk associated with how the appraiser would determine the value of the buildings. The issue is that appraisal methodology does not traditionally value the improvements in isolation or decoupled from the land. And so the appraised value of the buildings could vary by millions of dollars, or in some cases tens of millions of dollars, depending on how the appraisal is undertaken. And based on the language of the contract, there's not specific direction that can be given. That concludes my presentation. Staff is available to answer any questions you have. Also, Mr. Michael Drandell, representing the property owner, is also here.
So, Council, earlier we talked at some length in generalities about affordable housing. Here's a very specific situation. What questions do we have, if any, for staff before we hear from the public? Apparently none, so thank you for now. We'll get back to you. We'll now open the public hearing on item 8A, and we do have three speakers. They are Denise McGranahan, Igor Kokorev, and Eileen Sadaka. Ms. McGranahan, welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. To provide some background as to my involvement in this matter, my office, the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles, represents 26 senior low-income tenants who reside at Neilson Villa, and we began representing them in November of 2014 when the tenants received a notice that the owner had applied to HUD for an increase of $74 in rent. That increase was subsequently approved by HUD despite the tenants' objections. That increase, if implemented, would mean that the rent for all of my clients and many others would go from $474 to $548 per month. For my 26 clients, that would mean that they would be paying an average of 50% of their income to rent. To put this into perspective, on January 1, 2010, the basic rent was $341 per month. Since then, HUD had approved multiple increases amounting to a 62% rent increase. By comparison, the rent increase authorized by the Santa Monica Rent Control Board is somewhere less than 1%. The latest $74 rent increase has not been implemented pending the city's negotiations with the owner as to the future of the building. My clients are very anxious that they will be faced with the $74 rent increase and would without doubt prefer their rent to decrease to 30% of their income as soon as possible. The staff's recommendation would, without doubt, provide financial relief to the tenants in the very near future. It would also give the tenants a valuable opportunity to have their rents become truly affordable. However, if the council chooses to allow the mortgage to expire with the goal of purchasing the property, I would ask the council to provide gap funding to the tenants so that they do not have to endure the $74 rent increase or any further rent increases until then. I would also like the council to know that with respect to the purchase options after mortgage maturity, the staff report does not mention that there is a possibility that the tenant protection enhanced vouchers the tenants would receive if the owner requests them, and probably the owner would, at mortgage expiration could be converted to project-based vouchers.
Oh, I think we're going to have some questions for you, Ms. McGranahan.
Okay.
I saw those people reaching forward. Councilmember Himmelrich.
Hi, Denise.
Hi.
Let's talk about what could happen if we don't allow this company to keep managing it. Have you talked to some of the experts about it? Have you talked to National Housing Law Project, for instance? And
I've talked with Jim Grow at National Housing Law Project, and he sent me authority. So one of the problems with the city purchasing the property or waiting to purchase the property is because the city can't purchase it till 2018, and in 2017, when it expires, the owner could ask for or apply for enhanced vouchers. If the owner applies for enhanced vouchers, the question is, could they be converted to project-based vouchers? And we've been getting different. I hear from Jim Grow that they could, but the staff has heard otherwise. So I'm not really sure. But here's the problem. Right now, we know there's funding for these vouchers, for these enhanced or project-based vouchers on prepayment. But we don't know if there will be funding in 2018. And there's some indication that the mortgage maturity funding may not be there. So I'm concerned that we take a risk. It's like gambling in Las Vegas. That's my real concern. I like the idea, but it's risky.
Well, so let me ask you something else. Suppose it was no longer in the HUD program, so HUD was no longer controlling the rents. At that point, wouldn't this go back to rent? This was a building that was under rent control, yes?
Right, and I think the building would go under rent control, and the rents would be set at what the tenants are currently paying, which is still unaffordable, remember. And then when the units are vacated, the rents will go to market after the mortgage expires. So there's no real guarantee of affordability going forward.
Under this landlord. But should we own it, should the city own it, and put it into our affordable program, right, as opposed to the landlord's whatever he wants to do program, then we would have a better option of controlling it.
That's true. I mean, the city could do whatever it wants with respect to the affordability, but there'll be a gap of a time frame between the expiration of the mortgage and the purchase, and what happens in the 8 months, would have to be addressed. I mean,
I understand, and I think so. And I understand what you're saying, but you've not looked at the relative financial merits to the city, for instance, of buying a parcel of land worth $30 million for $1.
Well, that's way over my pay grade. There's no way I could analyze anything financial, and all I'm really looking at is how this benefits the tenants, because they're my clients. And I understand the city has to look at both of these options carefully in terms of what's best, weighing it. And I'm not saying one is recommended over the other. I'm just saying from the tenant's perspective, what it will benefit them is any immediate relief from this financial, burden that they're having with their rents. And that's what we really want. And I understand from staff that it could take only 2 or 3 months until these project-based vouchers could be issued. And that would be pretty immediate relief, whereas we have 3 years and uncertainty, and that's my concern.
You mean if the current for-profit corporation that's running the building prepays its loan, then it's possible these tenants could get, I'm sorry, there's some bug in front of my face, that they could get project-based vouchers within 3 months.
That's what I understand, that HUD would be willing to approve that. That's the information I've received.
Or actually enhanced vouchers, which, with the tenant's permission, could be converted to project-based
Right. And for
vouchers.
it's true that for some of the tenants who aren't of very low income, depending on which one option or the other may be better for them. Because with the enhanced vouchers, sometimes the rent's going to go up, sometimes it's going to go down. I mean, so it's not always clear that everyone's going to choose project-based. But
Right.
most probably will.
What project-based guarantees them is that they will only pay 30% of their income towards their rent.
Right.
And it will also, and the other thing that happens is that the landlord receives the payment standard.
Correct.
Which on these one-bedrooms would be approximately $1,500, $1,400.
About $1,352 is the current one-bedroom payment standard.
Okay, so $1,352. So regardless of what the tenant pays, the landlord will receive $1,352.
Right.
So if we became the landlord and they had project-based vouchers, we would get that $1,352.
Right, and the part that comes after the if you get project-based vouchers is where I'm worried. I mean, truly, the HUD has been funded for this for quite a period of time, so I don't know, why we would think they wouldn't be, but we could have a new Congress, and we may very well.
And I hear what you're saying, yeah. No, and I understand, and I, too, have spoken to Jim Grow, so I understand that. Now, if the status quo were maintained and they were in a better place in 2 years, right, in other words, and again, this is going way too far because I don't think we have enough information to make a decision, frankly, right now. But the ideal situation for them would be to get project-based vouchers as soon as possible. Is that right?
Right. I mean, even if you could subsidize the rent increases, because it's possible that G&K could increase the rent several times. Let's say you did that. There's still the idea that they're not getting their rent reduced to 30%, which I think for them is important.
But they can only reduce it. They can only increase it right now, 74, because as long as they have the HUD loan, they can only increase it as much as HUD allows them to.
But they could apply for another increase, because this increase, they've delayed implementing it. And so far, every increase has been authorized by HUD despite anyone's objections, and that's the concern. But but that's because the rents are really low. It's just that they're not low for the tenants.
I understand.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And Councilmember Winter, you also have questions for Ms. Granahan?
Yeah, so as I understand that in terms of the conversion of the vouchers, there's two things that have to happen. First of all, the tenants have to agree to the conversion, correct?
From the enhanced to the project base,
Yes.
that's correct.
And you said you represent 26 tenants who live at
Yes.
those? And would all of them agree to that conversion?
I haven't actually asked all of them, but I'm sure that my clients would, if they're eligible, would, I mean, I'm virtually positive that they would, because no one wants to move from this property, and they would want their rent to be decreased. So if, unless there's some strange reason, I mean, there could be reasons for people, not likely this population where there's a criminal background issue or some other issue that would prevent them from qualifying, for a voucher, but that's not likely to happen.
Okay, so you can reasonably assume they agree to it. And then the next thing is HUD has to sign off on it. And if I understand you, what you're saying is that the prospects are good in the short term that they would agree to the conversion. You're concerned that they would not agree to the conversion 2 or 3 years hence?
Well, right now there's a $7 million funding for these types of conversion vouchers, and it's like first come first serve. So when it's exhausted, it's gone. But from what I understand, that the HUD's interested in doing this and would be willing to do it, but it's funded on a yearly basis. So next year they may
By
not have
Congress,
the funding and so on.
By Congress, who knows what they do.
Right.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
When Mayor Pro Tem Vasquez and I met with HUD this spring, they pointed out that the funding was very tight now, and of course between now and 2018 we have an election. One reason why national elections are important. No more questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
We will now move on to Igor Kokorev, please.
Good evening, staff. Good evening, council. We start our war against JFK rent increase almost a year ago. And we organized a tenant association, and we start writing letters to mayor, to other members of the council, and we got your support. Thank you very much for that, first of all. But we cannot stand paying more than 50% of our income. We were forced to pay $540 since last January. And thanks to you, this action was stopped. And we pay now $474 per month with our income for $889 per month. This is more than 50%. So 50% of this building, the tenants of this building are Russians. We never got any documents in Russian. Even those who read English cannot understand all these sophisticated options which your staff proposed to you to vote. Our concern is very simple. We want to have project-based vouchers, enhanced, transferred into project-based vouchers, because we have heard that it might be about 30% of our income. That's good. That's what we pray to get from you as soon as possible. We cannot stay 2 years to wait. Some of our people faint, some of them left because they are older than me. I am the youngest, 75. The rest, they cannot wait, believe me. So the sooner you do it, the better for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. And our last speaker on the item is Eileen Sadaka. Is she here? Is that you coming forward? Good. Looks like you're also a resident of the building.
I'm Eileen Sadaka. I've been at Neilson Way a long time, and the rent is frozen right now, and we don't know for how long. So some kind of decision has to be made. I think the idea of the enhanced vouchers is good, and for me, I would transfer to the project base because for me it would be more beneficial. But the previous program, the 236 program, was a different program, and the incomes went up to, I believe, somewhere in the 30,000s, so that some people were paying more rent than us. So 20 of the apartments are now Section 8, And we're talking about 80 apartments. And a lot of the people are very old and sick. And I like the idea that Santa Monica is going to supervise the maintenance of the, everything about the building, because we've had a lot of problems in the past where the elevators didn't work and people who were living on the third floor didn't have access downstairs. So those are things that I think that you would do a really good job about. And I would appreciate your getting all the information you need, and I'm sure you'll do what's beneficial for the city and for us. And I know that you'll make the best choice, and I appreciate your listening to me and thanking you very much. Bye.
Well, thank you, and I'm touched by your trust in us, but Mr. Kokorev said some of the Russian speakers were having trouble understanding the complexity of this issue. Frankly, I think some of us may be having some trouble understanding the complexity of this issue as well. Councilmember Himmelrich, you are first on the stack to either ask questions of staff or make comments.
Well, I probably want to do both, but one of my issues here, and I've been through this before, is we are dealing in a very difficult situation, because we're talking about a situation where there's a building on a piece of land. The land is worth, based on our sale to Casa Del Mar a couple of years ago, and this land is twice the area. So we sold it to them for $12.5 million, so we know that this is worth a minimum of $25 million, the land that it sits on. We can buy it for $1. We have a building that's been on the land for 40 years, and that has to be valued separately from the land, so who knows how that happens. But we don't have in front of us any appraisals, any real estimates of value. As I understand it, the only estimate of value that's been given to us is a $30 million estimate given by the current landlords, the current current for-profit corporation that's operating the building, and that I think just must be wrong. We don't have any cash flow projections of how much income it would bring to us if we had it. It's not net valued. I mean, I say this only, and I understand that this is something that makes people's eyes blur over, but in my previous life I did a lot of litigation of these large property cases, and there are ways of appraising land, and there are ways of looking at deals like this. And for those of us who were on the Planning Commission, you may remember, although I think it may have come in after your time, that when you saw something, you saw value enhancement analysis, and you saw various capitalized values of the projects. We have none of that here, and I don't know how we could make I have to say I want to protect the tenants, and I have some ideas about how to do that, and I don't think it's such a big number, but I also think that it's our duty to look at this on behalf of the city in terms of maintaining the affordability, keeping control of what the rent levels are, and possibly acquiring a really substantial asset where we have the ability to house 100 senior citizens in perpetuity. So I'm troubled by the fact that even though I was hoping for a report that gave us more information about our financial options, which I don't see in this at all, that we can't make a decision on the information we have. Council Member Winter was talking about having a matrix for our affordable housing options. That's what we need here. We need, this is what you get if you do this. This is what the value is of what you get. This is what the cash flow is. And the bottom line is that you get this much cash and this much value, or whatever it happens to be. And at the end of the time, you have, today you have in present value terms, whatever it is, and I don't see any of that here. I don't see any of the sort of rigorous financial analysis that we ought to be doing, and I said this before, on something that could be worth as much as $70 or $80 million. It's a big number.
Well, I see a number of ways that we can and should protect the tenants here. What's harder for me to figure out is what's the best thing in the city's interest as far as where we go. And at the bottom of page 8 of the staff report, it gives 3 potential assessments for the property. One is $0, one is $12.5 million, and one is $32 million. And I find that range even more baffling than having no numbers at all. So let me turn to our city manager, because I think I'm a data-driven mayor and you're a data-driven city manager. How do we get the data to drive a decision here?
Well, 2 things. First of all, we have not undertaken this kind of rigorous analysis because we haven't, until really this project, thought about getting into this business. Now, given how we spent most of the evening, it probably is a worthwhile exercise to begin to figure out whether we should get into this business. I would not underestimate either the complexity of the analysis or the complexity of being in this business. We would want a partner because we don't really want to be landlords to low-income tenants, not because we are not sympathetic to their plight, but it's just we run a cemetery, at least for now. We run an airport. We run a police department, a fire department, a planning department, a bunch of parks, libraries, and we're just not equipped to become expert at this. So if the council wants to approve a standard deal for extending what is in place now with all of its imperfections, then you should vote for the staff report. If the council wants us to do a more rigorous analysis to really plumb whether this is the direction we want to go as these projects expire, then you should ask us to do that, and we'll take the time to do that, and we'll bring back the kind of report that you've asked for. It'll take us some time, and we'll have to figure out what happens to the tenants in the meantime, and it'll put us a little bit behind the 8 ball, because this is not something we've programmed into our work plan, but it's a significant set of issues, and again, given the priority that the council's put on this, this may be one of the first battles we want to at least figure out whether we want to fight.
If we delay the decision tonight, I think I feel at least obligated to take these tenants under our wing and make sure they're protected. So
well, let's ask
what
our,
would the
our
implications
staff,
be?
Let's ask our staff what thinking has gone into what would happen in the immediate short run if we were to not act now.
Including what's the worst that could happen and how we could respond.
The United States Department of Housing and Urban Development almost a year ago approved a $74 rent increase for the tenants, and that equates to a 16% rent increase. So there's that. The owners of property have graciously held off on implementing that, while they've been working with staff and the tenants over the last 10 months. So they have the right, they already have the right to raise the rent 16%, and that would be for a rent increase that was granted in the first part of 2015. So
for how many tenants?
That would be the
how
first
many tenants
thing.
would that be?
Sorry?
For how many tenants would that be?
For 80 tenants.
So $5,600 a month?
Sorry?
$5,600 a month total.
74 times 80, it's about 8,000.
50.
I did the math.
Okay.
Thank you. Sure.
Sorry, I just wanted to remind you that it isn't just the $74 increase that you heard earlier, that there are a great number, over half of them are paying over 30% of their income. And I don't remember the exact statistic that Jim gave you, but I believe there's like 40% of them are paying over 50% of their income now. So there are residents that are currently in the park or in this residence that are paying 65% of their monthly income. So even if you find the gap for the $74, there are people that are so on the fringe of being able to remain in the property that you need to consider that whole picture and not just that And I might just speak to a little bit of analysis before we jump to that we didn't do analysis. We actually did do analysis. We worked with consultants to actually do analysis of the overall projection. We did a capital needs analysis of the property to determine over time, over the next 12 years, what capital improvements would need to be done, and we assured that the $1 million that is currently in an escrow fund for that purpose covers the capital needs for the next 15, 20 years. And so the other thing we have done is that we have worked on some appraisal issue, but the way that the deed restriction is structured provides that the city hires an appraiser, the G&K hires an appraiser, the two come up with an appraisal, and if those two don't agree, there's a third appraiser who's hired. That is the end appraisal. So you need to know that you risk what that third appraisal will say. And that is the structure currently in the deed restriction. So those are some of the other factors that come into play. And if my understanding from the HUD regulation, and speaking to HUD, who's sent us a letter saying that they're willing at this point to allow us to do the project-based, is that this is not in fact a conversion project under HUD's eyesight. The way it's structured is that if the project goes to a point where the loan is repaid, then the only option at that point is a tenant enhanced voucher. At that point, project-based would not be attached because the tenant is already under a subsidy. So our understanding from HUD is that if this loan matures in 2017, and in 2018 the city decides to purchase it, we would not be allowed at that point to attach a project-based voucher, even though I understand that that's not consistent with what others have said.
Well, Councilmember Himmelrich has a follow-up question, I guess.
Well, first of all, I think everybody understands that upon mortgage maturity or some other kind of conversion, the what's issued or enhanced vouchers, and then tenants have a choice about whether I don't think any of us ever thought that you went immediately to a project-based voucher because that's voluntary with the tenant upon any of these, whether it's a mortgage maturity or a conversion, whatever it happens.
But it is available at prepayment. It's not available at post-payment.
I looked at the law. I don't know who told you that, but the expert on this from National Housing Law Project, I don't want to make this issue really, but National Housing Law Project says that that these are available after mortgage maturity, and I looked at the law myself, and I see that they're available after mortgage maturity. So I don't know to whom you were speaking at HUD, but they gave you bad information. Because
in either case, whether it's interpreted the way the National Housing Law Project does or the way that we understand from HUD, at the end of the day, the 3-year gap is going to make the existing residents be very insecure about their future. And we believe the option provides for long-term affordability for the existing residents and those in the future.
I can't say that I disagree with you, and I feel terrible that they're in this position and that they're jammed the way they are. But this is something that I have to say was sort of given to us as a done deal because this was in play in exactly the way it's in play 6 months ago when we first talked about it. Actually, I went to the building last fall, and this was happening then. I mean, this has been happening for a long time, and it is a very sad situation. But the short-term relief that's being given them by the landlord, in my opinion, does not justify, from our point of view, making a deal that is not a good deal for the city, and we are going to be facing this again in another year. There are, and perhaps the city manager can help, how many of these are there?
I don't know the answer to that. Do you?
How many of there are
202 or 236s are these HUD loans.
There's one other that is adjacent to this property that's a 202 that's expired. But we are in the process of preparing an information item to your council with that information in it, of all the at-risk.
And that's a property that we can acquire the building and the land for $1, right?
Yes.
So, yes, and this is a block from I just think that this isn't an analysis that's worth undertaking for us if we have at least 2 buildings that need to undergo it. And in the meantime, for tenant protections, we're talking about $67,200 a year on the if we pay the $74 for the 80 tenants. And I don't think it necessarily has to be that long, but I do think we need to know and I'm not saying that the right thing is for us to buy it or not buy it. What I'm saying is it's impossible to evaluate it under the analysis we have here, but I'm happy to hear any disagreement with that.
Okay, so some of us are looking for more analysis. I think staff's position is that maybe now or never. Let's continue the discussion with Mayor Pro Tem Vasquez.
I agree with the councilor on, or at least what I'm hearing so far, about if there's a possibility to purchase this thing and make this an asset, and if there's other buildings that are in possibly the same situation, I'd like to explore that. At the end of the day, if we can, as we were talking earlier about affordable housing, and here's a perfect situation where there's an opportunity to possibly save units that are truly affordable. And I like to see if we can do that. And if it means we need to delay it, I support that.
Councilmember Winter.
Well, I understand that maybe there hasn't been sufficient analysis of various metrics, but I also am concerned about what I'm hearing from the tenants and rolling the dice with them. I'm particularly concerned about the way the appraisal process works. And if let's just say, since the range we've been given here is between 0 and 30 to 35 million, let's just say it wound up 15. We just had a very long and sobering discussion about the shortage of funds we have available for this sort of thing. So we basically be using up what we have now for affordable housing to acquire this property. If just, go with me on that, and then we'd have nothing left. Whereas we have perhaps an imperfect solution as proposed to us, but it will give the tenants immediate relief, even if we spend $67,000 per year giving them a subsidy for that $74 a month increase that's waiting in the wings. As Ms. Collins points out, that still leaves a lot of them significantly rent burdened, even if we pick up that $74 per month. So to take the risk that we'd find ourselves in a situation where we're contractually obligated to use up the money we have in our housing trust fund, which could be put for other uses, and not give the tenants the immediate relief that comes with the project-based vouchers that they'd be able to get that would keep their rents at a certain percentage of their annual and monthly income. I'm just not so sure I'm prepared to take that plunge. I would certainly agree that as this comes up in the future, I'd like to understand the finances behind the other options more thoroughly. But right now I don't want to sit at the roulette table with people's lives at stakes.
This appears to be a conflict of timing. If we had this information and time to think about it, we might do one thing. Given the immediacy, the idea of senior tenants having to eat cat food because they can't afford to meet the existing rent troubles me a great deal. Councilmember Himmelrich, you're on again.
I think this is a little different, and again, I'm going to ask the city manager maybe to help with this, and maybe Mr. Agel. I think it's a little different than our typical housing trust fund issue in the sense that, first of all, the $15 million, if it is $15 million, wouldn't happen until 2018 when our option ripens. That's number one. But number two, this is a property that is worth considerably more than 15 million, particularly, with the cash flow that is based on vouchers and not on $500 a month. And it's something that we wouldn't necessarily have to put out the 15 million, but could borrow against, I think, because it will be a substantial asset.
So I would agree that this is different from what we might typically do. What we typically do is we would put money into something to create new affordability. In this case, we would be putting our limited money in, but we would actually not increase affordability in any way. So we'd be taking what you discussed earlier tonight, of very limited funds, but we're not getting one new unit of housing. And we could think of it in terms of, but we're perhaps putting in whatever the number is, somewhere between 0 and 30 million for an asset that may be more valuable. But for us to realize that value, would need to do something other than affordable housing. So affordable housing essentially makes it 0 or a negative value. So I think the challenge we've got would be those two elements. We'd be putting money into something, not getting anything more, and we're only realizing the value if at some point we decide would like to not have affordable housing there and use the land for something that does create value.
Councilmember O'Day.
So to just build on that, Andy, does that mean that the value opportunity really comes down to whether the city could be a more efficient manager of the property over the long run to provide affordability than the current owner who's would be our partner in this project?
The city or a nonprofit. So with the for-profit operator, there's got to be some profit. So somebody's making a profit off of it, whereas the nonprofit is going to operate it, and that's conceivably, that could be residual receipts that then get split with the city, something along those lines. So I think that's the difference. What potentially makes this different, though, is that if we were in a situation where we waited till 2018, it's not clear what's the incentive for the property owner, knowing that we're saying we're going to exercise this option, to actually do that conversion to project-based vouchers. It may make more sense at 2017 pay off the loan and say, we're actually letting this go to market, even if it is rent control, because A, potentially affects what our option price is, and B, it sort of says, you're not, why are we doing this? Why do we need to continue to do this if there's not an incentive? So it could, in that case, then mean that irrespective of what happens at HUD, if they're no longer in the program, it goes to market, we've lost those subsidies. And so for a nonprofit to operate affordable housing with those very, very low rents with no subsidies, they can't operate it. I mean, that's why it's very difficult without operating subsidies to operate a property with all extremely low income. And that's, although you may not have seen it in your attachments, that's actually the analysis we did with our real estate consultant, is to look at the operations over 30 years and actually compare it to our nonprofit model of operations. So I apologize we didn't give you that level of detail, but it was what we did working with our consultant.
Okay.
And oversimplifying what is a complicated choice for the council, and we've heard opinions on both sides of trying to grapple with the risks and potential rewards. A fair appraisal, right, which may or may not result from the process of us picking one, them picking one, and the two of them picking the third. But a fair appraisal ultimately will say the value is based upon the amount of money that comes to the project that a for-profit developer can extract. That's essentially the value of it, because it's deed restricted for the additional 55 years. On the other hand, what Andy's saying is that that's not the way it may come out, because they may have other options, right? So what we have is a path that we've used in the past, which is to essentially preserve the status quo, to extend something that would expire. And look, the profit-making entity built this with federal money, and a profit-making entity owns it, And if we're willing to leave that profit-making entity in place, the deal we've negotiated with them will keep essentially the status quo going for decades, with both its blemishes and its advantages. We know how to do that. We've presented that option. I think what we've heard is that we need to begin to break new ground. Is this the project to start on that, given all of the complexities? I think that's a hard decision, and I have a hard time making a recommendation that you should or you shouldn't. I think it's good questions for the council to ask. But there's a lot of moving parts here. If we were starting a year ago down this path because we knew it was the right path, we'd be in a different place than sort of coming now after we've negotiated a fairly standard deal, again, with its pluses and minuses, to undo that deal, figure out whether there's a better deal. There are going to be some short-term challenges because we don't own the building and we can't stop them from imposing the rent increases. We could offer to pay them, but now we're paying a for-profit developer to make a higher profit. So these are some of the challenges, and I don't have an easy answer. It is a tough one for the council to grapple with. It's a bird in the hand versus the potential for a bird in the bush.
But to clarify, if we go with the deal, we're not just maintaining the status quo, because I thought I heard that we now have a guarantee of HUD project-based vouchers, which maintain the status quo and substantially reduce the rent burden on the existing in-place tenants. I'm seeing a nod from our housing staff. Is that your understanding too? So to me, that's an important selling point. Councilmember Himmelrich.
Well, I have to say, and I try to not be a bad loser, and I can see that I'm going to lose this, and I have to say that I resent the fact, because we knew this was happening a year ago, because I was involved in this situation a year ago, and I resent the fact that we didn't start working on it a year ago, and consequently we're in this jam. And we should never be in this jam. We should always be in a place where we're out front of it. We shouldn't be doing business with for-profit developers who outsmart us by making an 8-month gap between the time that the loan expires and the time we can have our option. And this is a big problem for me. And if I have to start dogging people about these things, you know, at the very beginning when I first hear about it, I will be doing it because this is just a wrong way to go. And I know that we're going to go back and this for-profit developer is going to be getting their tax credits and getting their money out of this building, and we are going to be foregoing a very valuable asset. And in 55 years, when I am long gone, we're going to be in the same place, and who knows what will happen, and who knows who the tenants will be, and who knows what it will be like. But I just believe that this is wrong, and I think it's created by the fact that we aren't doing our work early enough, and we're getting in a jam, and we're just doing what is the easiest thing for us to do, and I do not like it.
Well, do I think we could have done better? I suspect we could have. I can't know. But the reality is we are where we are, and the purpose of our affordable housing policy is to house people affordably. It's not to make money, it's not to own property, it's to house people affordably. So personally, given the circumstances, the immediacy, the opportunity to get the project-based vouchers, and my knowledge of the situation of these tenants who I think need our protection in the short and long term, I will move the staff recommendation to authorize the city manager to negotiate and execute a modification and extension to the existing contract with Dept Government Housing Incorporated with the parameters outlined in the attachment, and to approve the budgetary changes identified in the financial impact and budget action section of the staff report.
I'm going to second that. And just one.
Motion by Mayor McKeown, seconded by Councilmember O'Day. And Councilmember O'Day, you wanted to comment.
Just one more question for the staff. The dollar buyout option that we have in 2018, is that also available at the end of the term of this deal, 55 years?
Yes, though we will add some more clarification on how that improvements are valued, which is part of the challenge we've got now, as it's ill-defined.
Right, but the land value is the real issue. I mean, the $1 for that land is pretty.
It would still be, that's correct. It would still be $1 for the land, and then there would be more definition on how the fair market value of the improvements is defined.
So if that option is preserved, that's still in the bank for the city, essentially.
That's correct.
So one way to look at this is our land banking, although 55 years is a long term of deposit. Any other comments from council members on this? We'll try a roll call vote. Oops, Councilmember Winter.
I just want to say that I completely understand Councilmember Himlich's frustrations with the process as it went through this time. And I think the staff and the managers have heard it, and I think next time it comes around, I have no doubt that we'll get the sort of analysis you're looking for. Is that fair to say?
It's more than fair to say. I don't know enough about the onset of this to comment on the substance of the concern going backwards. But I do know how conscientious we are about trying to take advantage of these things. But we're breaking new ground. Not new ground out of the entire country, but we're breaking new ground here in Santa Monica, and we're breaking new ground among cities in LA County. I don't know any city that's intervened to save a 202 or a 236 by taking it over. I think Councilmember Himmelrich has made a pretty eloquent argument for why we ought to explore that. She hasn't said we should. She said we ought to figure out whether that makes sense, because the private developers figured out a way to make money on this. And if we can't find a nonprofit who can at least break even, then we can't. But at least we ought to try. And I think the message of tonight, not looking backwards, but looking forward, is we can't just do what we've always been doing and expect different results. We're going to have to begin to do things differently. That message came through loud and clear from all 7 of you.
So I heard tonight that there's another property nearby, perhaps even immediately adjacent, coming up within the next few years. That would be Barnard Villa, I suppose, with somewhat different circumstances. But, I mean, let's, as part of what we do tonight, give direction to staff to prepare that analysis for us so that going forward, we're better prepared to know what to do in these situations. And we don't get to the point where it's do or die for people who just want to live in their homes. I mean, and my sympathies go out to them, because they're the ones who are really stuck here. We're stuck in a way, but we're not stuck in the same visceral way they are, who need a place to live and can't afford it if we don't do something to help. So that's why I made the motion to help them. And I also understand the frustration that Councilmember Himmelrich has expressed. We've talked about it a great deal. But I just don't see a better way to deal with this at this moment in time than to protect the tenants and go through with the deal. So, Mayor Pro Tem Vasquez, you had some comments?
Just real quickly, and I'm kind of torn on this one, but at the end of the day, I don't think we have much of a choice, is what I'm hearing. But what I'd like to say is that, especially in kind of echoing the comments that the mayor just mentioned, that there is another property, and I heard there might even be a second one out there, but whatever is out there, especially if it's out a year out, that not only that we do a good analysis of it, but let's take advantage of our housing commission. I understand this one never even went before the housing commission to evaluate. So, and if there's another project out there now, let's make sure we schedule that on their commission, because why aren't we taking advantage of their expertise?
I think we're ready for a roll call vote.
Councilmember O'Connor?
Yes.
Councilmember O'Day?
Yes.
Councilmember Winter?
Yes.
Councilmember Himmelrich?
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Vasquez?
Yes.
And Mayor McCune?
Yes, so that passes by a 5-1 vote of the City Council and moves us on to item 10.
Actually, item 9A.